The sky tore open at dawn. A flash of violet light erupted across the heavens, followed by the appearance of alien vessels, dark and angular, blotting out the stars. The world stopped. Cities ground to a halt as news feeds broadcast the event in real time. Satellites and telescopes scrambled to capture data, but no one needed advanced technology to see it. An armada of impossible size hung above Earth. Commander Elias Kane stood in the dimly lit war room of Earth Command in Geneva, his jaw clenched as he studied the tactical feeds. The holographic table projected a three-dimensional display of the alien fleet. There were over 1,000 ships, some as large as small moons, and all radiating a hostile energy signature. "They've made no move to attack yet," said Colonel Ayala, her voice tight with barely concealed panic. "They don't need to," Elias replied. His voice was calm, deliberate, the voice of a man who had seen war and survived it. "That's a psychological play. They're letting us stew, waiting for the fear to sink in before they strike." "Fear," General Rue scoffed, slamming his fist on the table. "We'll show them fear. Deploy the orbital defenses. We've been preparing for this." Elias turned to Rue, his expression unreadable. "We've been preparing for a skirmish, General, not an extinction event." Before Rue could retort, a voice cut through the room. "Incoming transmission!" The technician at the console looked pale. "It's them." The room fell silent. The holographic table flickered, then shifted. A towering figure appeared, humanoid but unmistakably alien. Its skin was a shimmering onyx, its eyes two pits of violet fire. The room seemed to grow colder as it spoke. "I am Archon Velrex of the Zarathan Dominion. You stand on the precipice of annihilation." The voice was deep and guttural, reverberating as if it came from the depths of a black hole. "Humanity has been judged as unworthy," Velrex continued. "Surrender your world within 3 cycles, and your extinction will be painless. Resist, and you will suffer a violence unlike anything your kind has ever known." The transmission ended abruptly. Silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of equipment. "Well," Rue said, breaking the spell. "We have our answer. Prepare the fleet." "No." Elias's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone turned to him. "No?" Rue snapped. "What would you suggest? Rolling over and dying?" Elias ignored the insult, his sharp eyes fixed on the hologram. "They didn't come here just to destroy us. If they wanted that, we'd already be ash. This is a game to them. They're testing us, studying us. We need to understand why before we act." Colonel Ayala nodded hesitantly. "He's right. Blindly throwing our forces at them is suicide. We need more information." "And how do you propose we get that?" Rue demanded. "Hard decisions." Elias's gaze swept over the room. "We need to send a delegation to that armada." Gasps and murmurs broke out. Ayala looked at him as though he'd gone mad. "You're suggesting we send people, our people, straight into the lion's den?" "Yes," Elias said firmly. "We send someone who can speak for humanity, someone who can stall them, gather intel, and buy us time to prepare." Rue sneered. "And who exactly do you suggest we send to their deaths? Yourself?" Elias paused, considering. "If that's what it takes." "Wait." Ayala held up a hand. "There's another option. We've been in contact with the Vanyari, a neighboring species that's been monitoring this sector. They might know more about the Zarathans." Rue waved her off. "Aliens playing nice? Don't be naive. They'll sell us out the first chance they get." "Maybe," Elias said. his mind already racing. But we don't have the luxury of trust. We meet with the Vanyari and simultaneously send a delegation to the Zerathans. 2 prongs, double our chances of survival. And who do you send to negotiate with the devils in the sky? Ayala asked softly. Elias locked eyes with her. Someone who won't come back. The room fell silent again. Ayala was the first to nod. I'll assemble the delegation, she said quietly, her voice betraying the weight of the task. Elias returned his attention to the hologram of the Armada, his hands clenched behind his back. In his heart, he knew this wasn't a battle they could win, not by conventional means. The Zerathans wanted violence, but humanity had one thing they didn't expect: desperation. And desperation made monsters of men. The Vanyari envoy arrived unannounced, their sleek, crescent-shaped ship descending through the stormy skies over Geneva with unsettling grace. Commander Elias Kane watched from the observation deck as the alien craft touched down. Its polished silver hull shimmered under the rain, reflecting Earth's city lights. They didn't wait for permission to land. Colonel Ayala muttered beside him, arms crossed. Elias glanced at her. Because they don't think they need it. We're the desperate ones in this deal, remember? The Vanyari were humanoid, but only vaguely so. Their elongated, ivory-skinned bodies moved with unnerving fluidity, their obsidian black eyes scanning the human delegation like predators sizing up prey. The leader stepped forward, his face impassive, but his voice smooth as silk. I am Envoy Seelan of the Vanyari Dominion, he said, inclining his head slightly. You requested our presence. We have come to discuss terms. Elias stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Commander Elias Kane, thank you for coming. Time is short, so let's get straight to it. Selen's thin lips curved into something resembling a smile. Humans. Always so direct. Very well. The war room was tense, the air heavy with suspicion, as Seelan studied the holographic projection of the Zerathan fleet. He ran a slender finger along the display, tracing their positions with unsettling familiarity. They are more formidable than you realize, Seelan said at last, his tone almost amused. Even your most advanced weaponry will barely scratch their hulls. And their strategy? Flawless. They will dismantle you. We didn't call you here for a funeral prediction, Colonel Ayala snapped, her temper fraying. We called you for help. Seelan turned to her slowly, his black eyes gleaming. And why should we help you? The Zerathans are the storm that scours the weak. They have left hundreds of civilizations in ruin. What makes you think humanity deserves survival? Elias leaned forward, his voice low and cold. Because we're not like the others. We don't bow. We fight. And if you help us, you'll see just how dangerous we can be, not just to them, but to you. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Seelan laughed, a soft, chilling sound. Ah, human arrogance. How refreshing. He leaned back, his smile fading. Very well. The Vanyari Dominion has observed the Zerathans for centuries. We know their tactics, their weaknesses. We could offer you this knowledge. For a price. Elias didn't flinch. Name it. Seelan's smile returned, sharper this time. Earth's outer colonies, the ones you lost contact with years ago. They are rich with resources, untapped. We will claim them, unchallenged, after this war. The room erupted in protest. Ayala slammed her fist on the table. You're asking us to sell out our own people! Seelan shrugged. Survival always requires sacrifice. Decide quickly. Time is not on your side. After the Vanyari left, the room descended into chaos. "We can't trust them!" Ayala snapped, pacing furiously. "They're vultures, picking at our bones before we're even dead." "They're opportunists," Elias said quietly, staring at the holographic projection of the Zarathan fleet. "Which means we can use them, if we're smart." Ayala stopped and turned to him, incredulous. "You're actually considering their deal?" Elias looked up at her, his expression hard. "I'm considering every option. If they have intel that can give us even a slight edge, it's worth the risk." "And what about the colonies?" Ayala demanded. "Are you really willing to sell them out?" Elias hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on him. He thought of the faces of the colonists he'd seen in news reports, the children running through dusty streets, the miners who worked tirelessly to keep Earth's economy afloat. But then he thought of Earth itself, its billions of people facing extinction. "I haven't decided yet," he admitted finally. "But if it comes down to sacrificing a few thousand to save billions..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Ayala's eyes narrowed. "You're better than this, Elias." "No, I'm not," he said, his voice sharp. "I'm exactly what this moment needs me to be." Late that night, Elias stood alone in the observation deck, staring out at the rain. The Vanyari deal weighed heavily on his mind, but another thought gnawed at him. Selin had been too familiar with the Zarathan fleet, too comfortable. The door slid open behind him, and Ayala stepped inside. "I pulled their ship's telemetry," she said without preamble. "They've been orbiting nearby for weeks, watching us." Elias turned to her, his jaw tightening. "Which means they knew this was coming. They didn't warn us." "They want to use us as much as we want to use them," Ayala said bitterly. Elias nodded slowly, his eyes dark with resolve. "Then we play along, for now. But we don't give them everything. And if they betray us, we make them regret it." Ayala finished. Elias turned back to the window, the reflection of the Vanyari ship glinting in his eyes. "They think they're smarter than us. Let's prove them wrong." The battle began in silence. Elias Kane stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, humanity's largest and most advanced warship, watching as the asteroid belt came alive with flashes of light. The Zarathan fleet, a monstrous wall of shifting black and violet, surged forward like an unstoppable tide. Earth's defensive fleet, barely a tenth the size of the invaders, maneuvered desperately to intercept. "Enemy fleet entering firing range," Lieutenant Rami reported, her voice tight with tension. "We're detecting energy spikes from their forward ranks, likely plasma cannons." Elias's jaw tightened. "Bring the railguns online. Prioritize their smaller ships. We need to punch holes in their formation." "Aye, sir!" The Dauntless trembled as its weapons roared to life, sending hypersonic slugs streaking across the void. Explosions rippled through the enemy's vanguard, but the Zarathan fleet pressed on, their massive dreadnoughts shrugging off the assault. "This isn't enough," Colonel Ayala muttered, standing beside Elias. Her face was pale but resolute. "We can't hold this line." "We don't need to hold it," Elias replied, his voice calm despite the chaos. "We just need to buy time." The Zarathan ships moved with eerie precision, their formations shifting like a predator circling its prey. On the tactical display, their fleet seemed less like individual ships and more like a single, living organism. "They're learning," Elias said quietly. "Sir?" Ayala asked, frowning. "They're adapting to our tactics," Elias explained. "Every move we make, they counter faster. If we keep playing by the book, they'll pick us apart. What's the alternative? Ayala asked. Elias turned to her, his eyes steely. We improvise. Rami, redirect Task Force Alpha to Sector 7. Tell them to cut engines and go silent. When the Zerathans advance, they'll have a clean shot at their flanks. Yes, sir, Rami said, her fingers flying across her console. Minutes later, the plan paid off. Task Force Alpha's ships, hidden among the asteroids, unleashed a devastating barrage into the Zerathan formation. 2 of their cruisers exploded in brilliant fireballs, and a third was left crippled, drifting aimlessly. Direct hit! Rami reported, her voice breaking into a relieved cheer. But Elias didn't share her optimism. They'll recover. Stay sharp. As if on cue, the Zerathan fleet shifted again, their massive dreadnoughts firing beams of energy that sliced through the asteroid field like scythes. Task Force Alpha's ships scattered, but 3 were caught in the blasts and disintegrated instantly. Damn it! Ayala swore. Elias's comms panel blinked with an incoming message. It was Envoy Selin. The hologram of the Vanyari leader flickered to life, his face calm, but his tone sharp. Your forces are faltering, Commander. Perhaps now you understand the futility of this resistance. Not the time, Selin. Elias growled. Selin raised an eyebrow. I merely offer an observation. The Zerathans cannot be defeated through brute force. Retreat while you still can. Retreat isn't an option, Elias snapped. Where's your fleet, Selin? You promised reinforcements. Selin's lips curved into a thin smile. The Vanyari do not throw lives away recklessly. We will engage when the time is right. Elias's hands curled into fists. If you don't get your ships in this fight now, there won't be a right time. The hologram vanished before Selin could respond. The Dauntless shuddered as a Zerathan beam weapon grazed its hull. Sparks flew from the consoles, and alarms blared. Shields at 30%! Rami shouted. Redirect all power to forward batteries, Elias ordered. Focus fire on that dreadnought. I want it gone. The ship's railguns unleashed a relentless volley, hammering the massive Zerathan vessel. For a moment, it seemed to falter. But then, a smaller Zerathan ship darted forward, ramming into the Dauntless's starboard side. The impact sent Elias sprawling. He tasted blood as he pulled himself up, ignoring the pain. Damage report! Starboard engines are offline! Ayala yelled. We've lost maneuverability! Elias's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now crippled. The fleet was falling apart around them, and the Vanyari had abandoned them. Then, an unexpected twist. A Zerathan ship broke formation. It wasn't fleeing. It was defecting. Sir? Rami said, her voice filled with disbelief. We're receiving a signal from that ship. They're hailing us. Elias exchanged a look with Ayala. Patch it through. The image of a Zerathan appeared on the screen, its features sleek and predatory, but its expression strangely hesitant. I am Zelvora, it said, its voice harsh but understandable. I bring you a warning. The Zerathan fleet is not invincible, but your allies cannot be trusted. They will betray you. Elias stared at the alien in stunned silence. Why are you telling us this? Because your survival is necessary, Zelvora replied cryptically. And because the Archon's ambitions will destroy more than your world. They will destroy us all. Before Elias could respond, the transmission cut off. The battle raged on, but the seed of doubt had been planted. As the Dauntless limped away from the front lines, Elias knew 2 things. The Zerathans were more divided than they appeared, and the Vanyari were playing a dangerous game. And somewhere in the chaos, an opportunity was waiting, if he could survive long enough to seize it. The battered Dauntless limped into the shadow of Titan, its scorched hull reflecting the eerie orange glow of Saturn's largest moon. The fleet's survivors gathered here, a skeleton force clinging to hope and determination. Repairs were underway, but morale was fragile. The Zarathan armada loomed beyond the asteroid belt, regrouping for their next assault. In the Dauntless's dimly lit strategy room, Commander Elias Kane and Colonel Ayala stood over a holographic display, poring over data from the mysterious defector, Zelvora. "This is insane," Ayala muttered, rubbing her temples. "We're supposed to trust the word of a Zarathan? After everything they've done?" Elias leaned on the table, his eyes fixed on the display. "I don't trust him, but he's given us something the Vanyari haven't, an insight into the enemy. Look at this." He gestured to a section of the hologram, showing structural schematics of a Zarathan dreadnought. Zelvora claims their fleet relies on a central command nexus. If we take it out, the fleet's coordination falls apart. They won't be able to adapt to our tactics. Ayala frowned. "And you think this isn't a trap? What if this is a ploy to lead us into an ambush?" Elias sighed. "It might be, but if he's telling the truth, this could be the only way to even the odds." The room's atmosphere grew heavier as Envoy Selen entered, his tall, slender frame casting a long shadow across the table. "I hear you've been speaking with a Zarathan," Selen said, his tone dripping with disdain. "We received intel," Elias said flatly. Selen's black eyes glinted. "And you believe it? How delightfully naive. The Zarathans are masters of deception." "Like the Vanyari?" Ayala shot back. Selen ignored her, focusing on Elias. "Your fleet is in no condition for reckless gambles. Accept our offer. With our technology, you could fight them properly." "Your technology," Elias said, his voice sharp, "which you've conveniently withheld while our people die." Selen's expression didn't waver. "We are not here to die for your cause, Commander, but if you prove yourselves capable of surviving, we might reconsider the terms of our alliance." Elias clenched his fists, but kept his tone measured. "Then stay out of our way." Selen tilted his head, an amused smile playing on his lips. "As you wish." He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Do be careful, Commander. The Zarathans are not the only ones who know how to exploit desperation." Hours later, Elias convened a smaller, trusted group in the secure operations room. Ayala, Lieutenant Rami, and Captain Jace Navarro, the fleet's most daring pilot, sat around the table. "We're going after the command nexus," Elias announced. Navarro whistled low. "You really think this Zelvora is on our side?" "No," Elias admitted. "But the intel checks out. If we pull this off, we have a shot at crippling their fleet." Ayala leaned forward, her voice tense. "And if we fail, we lose everything. The Zarathans won't give us a second chance." "That's why this has to be a covert op," Elias said. "A small strike team, one ship. Navarro, that's where you come in. You'll pilot us in under the radar. Rami, you'll handle the infiltration." "And you?" Ayala asked. Elias's gaze was steely. "I lead the team. This mission doesn't succeed without me." Ayala slammed her hands on the table. "Damn it, Elias! You're the only one holding this fleet together. If you go and something happens—" "I'm not asking for permission." Elias cut her off. "This isn't about me. It's about giving humanity a chance. If we stay here, we die. If we take this shot, we might just survive." Ayala stared at him for a long moment before leaning back, defeated.
You're a stubborn bastard, you know that?
Elias allowed himself a faint smile. It's why I'm still alive. The mission began under cover of darkness. The Phantom, a stealth corvette, slipped through the asteroid belt, its cloaking system rendering it nearly invisible. Navarro sat at the controls, his hands steady despite the tension crackling through the ship. "We're coming up on the coordinates," he said.
"If this intel's bad, we're about to find out the hard way."
"Stay sharp," Elias said, checking his weapon. "Rami, what's our status?" "Cloaking's holding," Rami replied, her fingers dancing over the console. "No sign they've spotted us." As they approached the Zarathan command ship, a massive fortress bristling with weapons, the tension became palpable. Navarro frowned. "That thing's a flying death trap. Are we sure this is a good idea?" "No," Elias said, "but it's the only idea we've got." The Phantom latched onto the command ship's hull, and the team disembarked, their boots magnetized to the surface. Inside, the corridors were dark and labyrinthine, the air thick with an ominous hum.
"This place gives me the creeps,"
Navarro muttered, his voice low.
"Focus,"
Elias said.
"Rami, where's the Nexus?"
Rami studied her scanner. 3 levels down. We'll have to move fast. There's activity in the lower decks." As they descended, the team encountered resistance. Zarathan guards, sleek and deadly, their weapons firing bolts of searing energy. The corridors erupted into chaos as the strike team fought their way forward.
"Go! Go! Go!"
Elias shouted, covering Rami as she hacked a sealed door. Behind them, Navarro fired his rifle, taking down 2 guards before diving into cover.
"We're not getting out of this clean, Kane!"
"We don't need clean," Elias replied. "We need results." Finally, they reached the Nexus chamber, a vast, pulsating core of alien technology. Rami sprinted to the console, her hands flying over the controls. "I'm in," she said. "But this system is—" The doors slammed shut, and an alarm blared. From the shadows, Zarathan soldiers emerged, led by a figure Elias recognized immediately. Zelvora.
"You've done well to get this far,"
Zelvora said, his voice cold.
"But the Archon anticipated your treachery."
Elias raised his weapon.
"Then why are you here, Zelvora? You could have let us die before reaching the core."
A faint smile crossed the Zarathan's face.
"Because I needed you to see what you're up against, and because some wars are not won with violence alone."
Elias's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the room plunged into darkness. The sudden darkness was suffocating. Elias Kane's senses sharpened as he pressed himself against the cold wall of the Zarathan command nexus. In the pitch-black chamber, the sound of faint hums and shifting feet echoed ominously. "Rami?" Elias whispered. "What the hell just happened?"
I don't know,"
Rami stammered, her voice barely audible.
"They must have triggered an override. The whole system's locked down."
A chilling voice cut through the darkness.
"Do you feel it now, Commander? The helplessness? The inevitability?"
It was Zelvora. His voice, calm and calculated, sent a shiver down Elias's spine. "Helplessness isn't in my vocabulary," Elias shot back. "Why don't you stop hiding in the dark and fight like you mean it?" A faint glow erupted from the center of the room as the command core reactivated, bathing the chamber in an eerie violet light. Zelvora stood there, flanked by Zarathan soldiers, his sleek armor glinting like obsidian. "You misunderstand," Zelvora said,
This isn't about combat. It's about survival. You're in the heart of a war you can't win.
Elias raised his rifle, signaling Navarro and Ayala with a subtle hand gesture. They moved to flank Zelvora, while Rami worked quietly at her console.
You led us here,
Elias said, his voice laced with anger. Why? If this is a trap, why didn't you kill us the moment we stepped aboard? Because the Archon would have considered it a waste, Zelvora replied.
And because I see potential in you. Potential for what? Ayala demanded, her weapon trained on the nearest guard. Zelvora's black eyes locked onto Elias. For rebellion. Elias blinked, caught off guard. Rebellion? The Zarathan fleet is not united, Zelvora explained. The Archon's rule is absolute, but not uncontested. There are those among us who see the futility of this war. Your kind fights with desperation, ingenuity. You could tip the scales, but not like this. Elias exchanged a glance with Ayala, who looked as skeptical as he felt. And we're supposed to trust you?
After everything your people have done? No, Zelvora said simply. Trust is irrelevant. You need me because I can give you the means to destroy the Archon, and I need you because humanity's survival ensures his downfall. Rami's voice broke through the tense standoff. Commander, I've got access to the core, but it's heavily encrypted. I need more time. You don't have it, Zelvora said. The Archon knows you're here. Reinforcements are already en route.
Then tell us how to stop him,
Elias snapped, his patience fraying. Zelvora stepped closer, his movements deliberate, but unthreatening. Destroying the Nexus will disrupt the fleet, but it won't end the war. The Archon's true power lies in the Celestial Forge, a station hidden deep within the gas giant Gornith 7. It controls the hive network that binds his fleet. Destroy it, and the Zarathan armada collapses. How do we even get there? Ayala asked. You'll need this, Zelvora said, producing a small, glowing device from his armor. A navigational key. It will guide you through the storm surrounding the forge. Elias hesitated. Why give this to us now? You could have just handed it over back on Earth. Because I needed to see if you were capable, Zelvora replied. The Archon will stop at nothing to kill you, Commander. If you falter, this is all for nothing. The tension shattered as the doors burst open, and a squad of Zarathan soldiers stormed in. Energy bolts filled the air, forcing Elias and his team into cover. Time's up! Navarro shouted, firing wildly at the incoming soldiers. Rami, blow the core and fall back, Elias ordered. I need 30 seconds, Rami yelled, her hands flying over the console. Zelvora stepped forward, his voice commanding. Leave them to me. Before Elias could respond, Zelvora drew twin plasma blades, their violet light casting an otherworldly glow. He moved with inhuman speed, cutting through the Zarathan soldiers with precision and ruthlessness. Navarro let out a low whistle. Remind me never to piss that guy off. Rami slammed her fist on the console. Done! Core overload initiated. Fall back! Elias shouted, grabbing Rami and pulling her toward the exit. The team sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors of the command ship as alarms blared around them. Explosions echoed in the distance, signaling the core's imminent destruction. Zelvora caught up with them, his armor splattered with blood. Your ship is docked on the lower level. Go. Now. What about you? Elias asked. I'll delay their pursuit, Zelvora said. If you fail, all of this is meaningless. Remember that. Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Good luck. Zelvora's lips curled into a faint smile. Luck is for the unprepared,
Survive, Commander. The Phantom detached from the Zarathan command ship just as it exploded, a chain reaction tearing through its massive hull. The shockwave buffeted the Corvette, but Navarro's expert piloting steadied them. Elias sat in the cockpit, staring at the navigational key in his hand. "What now?" Ayala asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "We go to Gornath 7, Elias said, "and we end this war." The team exchanged weary but determined glances as the Phantom accelerated into the void. The Phantom emerged from hyperspace, the glowing expanse of Gornath 7 dominating the viewport. The gas giant churned with storms of violent reds and golds, its atmosphere a roiling cauldron of chaos. Flashes of lightning illuminated the deadly debris field surrounding the planet, a graveyard of ships from wars long forgotten. "Hell of a welcome party," Navarro muttered, his hands steady on the controls. Elias Kane stood behind him, arms crossed. The navigational key Zelvora had provided pulsed faintly in his hand, its light guiding their path. "Follow the key's coordinates," Elias ordered. "Keep us as low as possible. We don't know how much time we have before the Zarathans realize where we're headed." "Aye, Commander," Navarro said, his usual swagger replaced by grim focus. Rami studied the sensor array, her expression tense. "This debris field isn't random. I'm picking up active energy signatures, some kind of automated defense system." "Great," Ayala said dryly, checking her weapon. "So we're flying into a death trap. Fantastic." Elias ignored her sarcasm, focusing on the task ahead. "Rami, how much time before we're in range of the Forge's defenses?" "Minutes, maybe less," Rami replied. "If they detect us, we'll have a swarm of drones on us before we can blink." The Phantom weaved through the debris field, its cloaking systems struggling to mask their presence in the storm's electromagnetic chaos. Navarro's knuckles whitened on the controls as he navigated through narrow gaps between jagged wreckage and drifting mines. "Hold on!" he shouted as a chunk of twisted metal spun toward them. He rolled the ship, barely avoiding a collision. "That was too close!" Ayala snapped. "Relax," Navarro shot back. "I've got this." Rami's console beeped urgently. "Not for long. I'm picking up movement. Hostile drones. Closing fast." Elias grabbed the intercom. "All hands. Battle stations. Navarro, get us through this field and into the atmosphere. Rami, disable as many of those drones as you can from here." "On it!" Rami said, her fingers flying across her console. The first wave of drones descended, sleek and angular, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. The Phantom's turrets fired back, lighting up the debris field with streaks of energy. Explosions erupted around the ship as Navarro performed daring maneuvers, keeping them one step ahead of annihilation. "I can't shake them!" Navarro yelled. "These bastards are everywhere!" "Rami, status!" Elias demanded. "I'm trying!" Rami shouted, sweat dripping down her temple. "Their systems are encrypted! I need more time!" Elias cursed under his breath. "Ayala, man the aft turret! Keep those drones off our tail!" Ayala sprinted to the turret controls, her sharp eyes locking onto the swarm of attackers. "Let's see how you like this," she muttered, unleashing a barrage of fire. Several drones exploded, but more took their place. "We're not going to make it through this field," Navarro said, his voice tight. Elias gripped the back of Navarro's chair. "Take us into the storm. Use the atmosphere to shake them." Navarro's head whipped around. "Are you insane? That storm will tear us apart!" "So will those drones," Elias barked. Do it! The Phantom dove into Gornath 7's atmosphere, plunging into the swirling maelstrom of clouds. The ship shook violently as winds howled around them, lightning flashing in blinding arcs. "Shields are barely holding!" Rami shouted, gripping her console.
"Just hold together a little longer,"
Elias muttered, his eyes fixed on the viewport. The drones pursued them into the storm, but the turbulence worked in the crew's favor. Several of the attackers collided with debris or were struck by lightning, their smoking remains plummeting into the planet's depths. "We're losing them," Navarro said, his voice filled with relief. "Good," Elias said. "Now find us a way to that forge." The storm parted briefly, revealing the Celestial Forge, a massive structure suspended in the eye of the storm. Its black spires radiated an ominous glow, and streams of energy flowed between them like veins of a living organism. "That's it," Rami whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. Navarro brought the ship closer, but alarms blared again. "New contacts!" Ayala yelled. "Zarathan fighters, inbound!" Elias clenched his fists. "They're here faster than we thought. Navarro, get us into the forge. Rami, prep the EMP charges." The Phantom dodged incoming fire as it raced toward the forge. Zarathan fighters surrounded them, their sleek forms darting like sharks. Ayala fired the turrets, but their numbers were overwhelming. "We're not going to make it," Rami cried. "Yes, we are," Elias said, his voice filled with steel. "Navarro, full throttle." The Phantom roared forward, slamming into the forge's hangar bay just as its shields gave out. Sparks flew as the ship skidded to a halt. "Everyone out," Elias commanded, grabbing his weapon. The team stormed into the forge, weapons at the ready. The interior was a labyrinth of alien machinery, pulsating with unnatural energy. Zarathan soldiers awaited them, and the corridors erupted into chaos. Elias led the charge, his rifle blazing. "Rami, where's the core?" "2 levels down!" Rami shouted, returning fire. "Move! Navarro, cover our rear!" The team fought their way deeper into the forge, every step a struggle against overwhelming odds. The Zarathans fought with ruthless precision, but humanity's desperation and ferocity drove the team forward. As they reached the core chamber, Rami gasped. "It's massive." The core was a pulsating orb of energy, suspended by beams of light. Its power was almost palpable, radiating waves of heat and menace. "Plant the charges," Elias ordered. Rami and Ayala rushed to the core, setting the EMP devices. The sound of reinforcements echoed behind them. "We've got company!" Navarro yelled, firing at the approaching soldiers. Elias turned to face the oncoming wave, his heart pounding. "Hold the line! We finish this, or we die trying!" The core chamber was a metallic maze, a place where time seemed to stop, where the oppressive weight of the Zarathan Empire's power pulsed from the orb at its center. Elias Kane's boots clanged heavily against the floor, his eyes fixed on the glowing sphere. The EMP charges were set, their countdown ticking down with a deafening precision. Rami, her hands trembling, moved away from the core. The pulse of the orb was becoming unbearable, its energy infiltrating their bodies with every step. 10 seconds, Rami muttered, her voice strained, as if speaking any louder would shatter the fragile air around them. The air in the chamber was thick with tension, thick enough to cut. The Phantom's last transmission had barely made it out of the atmosphere, and the reinforcements, the swarm of Zarathan soldiers now flooding the chamber, were closing in on them. Elias stood at the front, his rifle aimed, his breath shallow.
Each inhale felt like a betrayal of the body, each exhale a countdown toward oblivion. He wasn't sure who would fall first, him, his team, or the empire that had swallowed countless worlds. Ayala was already fighting, not a single hesitation in her movements, as if her very soul burned with the need to strike. She moved like a predator in the shadows, silencing one Zarathan soldier after another with cold efficiency. Navarro, though, was different. His eyes weren't focused on the enemy. They lingered on Rami for a fraction too long, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. The hairs on the back of Elias's neck stood up, and for the first time since they'd stepped into this hellhole, he felt a deep, gnawing unease. As the countdown reached 5 seconds, Navarro's movement was too swift, too deliberate. In one fluid motion, he turned his rifle on Rami. "No!" Elias roared, but the words came too late. A single shot rang out, its impact shaking the room as Rami crumpled to the floor, blood splattering across the cold metal surface. "No!" Ayala screamed, spinning toward Navarro, her weapon raised. Navarro didn't flinch. "She was a liability," he said, his voice cold, devoid of remorse. Elias's world went black for a moment, the anger burning through him like fire, scorching everything in its path. He raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Navarro's chest, but his finger never moved. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. Navarro had known they needed Rami. He had seen the charge countdown ticking, yet had chosen this moment to tear them apart. "Why?" Elias forced the word out, barely able to speak through the tightness in his throat. Navarro didn't answer. Instead, he turned, walking slowly toward the core, his back to them, his expression unreadable. He seemed entirely unaffected by the chaos around him. For a moment, Elias hesitated. His weapon wavered, the decision hanging in the balance. There was a part of him, cold, rational, that understood the betrayal. Navarro had always been self-serving, driven by ambition. But there was another part, one that still wanted to believe in the team, in the cause they fought for. But Rami wasn't part of that equation anymore, and Navarro wasn't someone Elias could save. "Stop him!" Ayala shouted, pushing past Elias and charging at Navarro. Elias snapped out of his momentary daze and followed. His legs felt heavy, but his resolve had never been clearer. He reached Navarro just as the traitor was positioning himself next to the core. "You don't understand," Navarro said, his voice low, almost soothing. "This war is over. The Archon has already won. All we're doing is delaying the inevitable." Elias grabbed him by the arm, slamming him against the cold metal wall. "You'll never win this war. You've already lost." Navarro's eyes flickered with something Elias couldn't place. The slightest hint of doubt. Or was it guilt? It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You're the one who doesn't get it," Navarro replied, shoving Elias off with a surprising strength. He looked at the core, then back at the team. "The real weapon is the forge itself. The Archon has control over everything. You can destroy the fleet, but the forge's power isn't just in its creation. It's in what it can do to the universe itself." Before Elias could respond, Navarro stepped forward, slamming a fist into the console beside the core. The power in the room surged, and a low hum echoed from the walls. The countdown had reset. "What did you do?" Elias demanded, but Navarro just smiled coldly. "The EMP charges are a distraction. What I've done," he said, "is activate the core. You're not stopping it now. This is your ending, Elias. The universe will burn." The room began to tremble. The core, once a simple power source, now thrummed with an energy Elias had never felt before. A wave of heat washed over them, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with raw power. "Get to the ship!" Elias shouted. "Now!" Ayala's face was a mask of disbelief. "What are you talking about? We can still—"
"No,"
Elias interrupted.
"There's no time. The core is primed. The forge is about to explode. We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The forge had already started to collapse, its energy rippling outward, shaking the very structure of the station. Sparks flew, and the air turned acrid. The last thing Elias saw before the world turned to fire was Navarro's smirk as he stepped away from the core. The final betrayal had been sealed. The Phantom was already lifting off when the first explosion hit. Gornath 7 trembled as the forge's collapse sent shockwaves through the gas giant's core. The team barely made it through the storm before the shockwave reached them. "Brace for impact!" Navarro shouted, his voice filled with false urgency as the Phantom lurched under the force of the blast. Elias's head slammed against the console, and he blacked out. But not before he saw Navarro's face. Empty, detached. Elias awoke to the sound of alarms blaring and the shrill pitch of the Phantom's systems warning them of imminent catastrophe. The cold bite of metal against his cheek reminded him that he wasn't dead, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was grateful for the pain. "Elias, wake up!" Ayala's voice cut through the haze. He groggily opened his eyes, his mind still reeling from the devastation at Gornath 7, the collapse of the forge, and the betrayal of Navarro. His body ached, but the real pain was the loss of Rami. She had been the key if Navarro had just let them finish their mission. But he didn't have time for grief now. The war was still raging, and for better or worse, he was still alive. He shot upright, taking in the scene. Ayala was at the controls, her face drawn tight with focus. Rami's lifeless body was gone, as was Navarro. Elias didn't know whether to be relieved or disgusted by the traitor's disappearance, but there was no time for either. "How bad?" Elias rasped, his throat raw from the smoke and energy pulses that had rocked the forge. "Bad," Ayala replied tersely, her fingers flying over the console. "The Phantom is functional, but barely. We've got a lot of holes to patch, and less than an hour before the Zerathans pick up our signal." She glanced at him, her expression dark. "Navarro." "I know," Elias interrupted. "We don't need to talk about it right now. We need to get out of here, back to the fleet, and rally the rest of humanity. This is just the beginning." The Phantom raced toward the distant jump gate, the gas giant of Gornath 7 looming ominously behind them. As they entered the final stretch, a burst of static crackled through the comms. "This is the Revenant," a familiar voice came through. "Elias, report. We're holding back the Zerathan reinforcements, but we can't hold forever." "Sergeant," Elias said, his voice hoarse but steady. "We're on our way. Get ready for a full-on counterattack. We're going to end this once and for all." Minutes later, they emerged from hyperspace. The Revenant and the remnants of the human fleet loomed ahead, battered but still standing, their weapons primed for the coming fight. The fleet had been holding the line ever since the fall of the forge, but their resources were running thin. The war was a battle of attrition, and humanity was barely hanging on. Elias turned to Ayala. "We need a plan, and we need it fast. That forge collapse won't be enough to take down the entire Zerathan Empire. They'll come back stronger." Ayala nodded grimly. "I've been thinking. There's a chance we can use the forge's energy to create a weapon strong enough to cripple their fleets, if we can access the right systems and integrate them into the Revenant's power grid. Elias's eyes narrowed. You think the Forge's core can still be used? It has to be, Ayala replied. It's the only way. If we're going to have any shot at ending this war, we need to turn their power against them. But we're running out of time. The Zerathans are already mobilizing their next wave. The crew of the Phantom was joined by the remaining human soldiers, and together they boarded the Revenant, preparing for one last strike. The war was about to reach its final chapter. They would either end it here, or the Zerathans would annihilate them all. As they reached the command center of the Revenant, Elias took a deep breath. It was time for the hardest choice he'd ever have to make. They were outnumbered, and their resources were drained, but there was something in his gut telling him that humanity had one final advantage: resolve. The Zerathans may have had the technology, the fleets, and the resources, but humanity had something they couldn't replicate: willpower, the drive to survive, the stubbornness to fight, no matter what the cost. He turned to Ayala. We take the fight to them. We destroy their flagship and cripple their command structure. If we don't, this war will drag on for years. Our people will die in the endless grind, and the Zerathans will eventually win. We need to break their command. Ayala's gaze hardened, and she nodded. I'm with you, Commander. We'll fight until there's nothing left to fight for. The Revenant surged forward, its weapons firing on all cylinders. The human fleet launched into battle with renewed fury, but the Zerathans were ready, their massive warships cutting through the battlefield like scythes through wheat. The odds were insurmountable, and yet the humans fought with a ferocity that the Zerathans hadn't anticipated. Elias and Ayala led the charge, breaking through the enemy lines with reckless abandon. The Revenant tore through the Zerathan fleets, its cannons firing relentlessly, but Elias's mind was elsewhere. He knew that while the battle raged, the real fight was in the heart of the Zerathan flagship. The plan was simple. A small team would board the flagship and plant a series of EMP devices to disable its power core. With their flagship incapacitated, the Zerathan fleet would lose its central command structure, throwing them into disarray. The team boarded the enemy flagship in a daring assault. The Phantom's crew moved silently through the hull of the massive ship, cutting down Zerathan soldiers who stood in their way. Their mission was clear: disable the power core and buy humanity enough time to finish the battle. In the heart of the flagship, Elias's team faced the final, most difficult task: planting the EMP devices in the core's central chamber. They worked in unison, their movements precise. But the Zerathans were relentless. The air was thick with the sounds of weapons fire, and Elias could feel the weight of every decision he made. If they failed, it would mean the end of humanity. Almost there, Ayala said, her voice tight as she held off an oncoming wave of Zerathan soldiers. The EMP devices clicked into place, and Elias pressed the final button. The core hummed in protest, its energy spiking. A moment of sheer, suffocating silence followed. Then, the explosion. The Revenant shook violently as the flagship's power core was disabled. The Zerathan war machine ground to a halt. Without their flagship, the fleet became a collection of scattered, disorganized ships. Elias watched from the Revenant's command deck as the remaining Zerathan ships began to fall, one by one. The chaos that ensued on the battlefield was unlike anything he had seen. The humans pressed forward with relentless energy, the collapse of the Zerathan fleet inevitable. The war was over. As the last of the Zerathan warships turned to retreat, Elias stood, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Humanity
had done the impossible. They had fought, they had endured, and they had won. But at what cost? He looked over at Ayala, her face a mirror of his thoughts. They had saved humanity, but the sacrifices were too many. They had lost friends, comrades, and ideals. And yet, they had prevailed. The Zarathans had come for violence, but humanity had delivered oblivion. And it had been enough.